Okay, thank you. Emily. Hey, James, how will you pronounce your last name?
Fanciullo.
Fanciullo.
Yep.
Are you Italian?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. Now, usually the O and I maybe. Yeah.
Are the people on Zoom already logging in?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right. I think I might try to log in as well.
Okay.
Well, your topic is actually pretty scary. It's humanity at a precipice.
Yeah, it's
Dropping dead.
it's very depressing.
Yeah. I didn't realize that my chair is red in color too, so that my mask doesn't show as clearly.
They're okay.
Match perfect.
Yeah.
So we start at 1 more minute.
Okay.
2 more seconds.
Yes.
Hey, on the conference, I'm just here to say hi and
Yeah,
congratulations.
thanks.
Yeah, just to step back, but I can't come to that.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
So I guess last name is Ord.
Ord, yes,
Ord.
yes.
Is it British?
Australia.
Australia. Okay. Yeah. So we're fellow Australian here also.
All right, I think we might can get started. Okay. So welcome to the first official research activity of the Hong Kong Catastrophic Risk Center. I am Andrea Sauchelli, the director of the center and the associate professor in the Department of Philosophy. To celebrate the launch of the center, we have many special guests here in this venue. We have Professor Chang, the president of Lingnan University, Professor Mok, vice president, and Professor Ye, the dean of the Faculty of Arts. I am pleased, of course, to see my colleagues from the Department of Philosophy and from other units of the university. Also, welcome to all people who are following this event online. Last time I checked, we had more than 140 registered guests.
Okay. Very impressive.
Thank you all for joining us and for your support. So before giving the floor to Professor Chang, a brief reminder of the schedule. Professor Chang and I will briefly introduce the center. Then we will show a 20-minute pre-recorded talk by Professor Toby Ord. Then Professor Ord will join us for a live interview with me, which will last for about 40 minutes. We will then have a 20 more minutes for questions to Professor Ord from the audience here. And of course, for logistic reasons, I will give priority to people attending in person. Professor Chang.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Professor Ord, guests and colleagues. I'm most delighted to welcome you all, including guests who are joining us online, to the launch of the Hong Kong Catastrophic Risk Center, HKCRC here at Lingnan University. My deepest thanks go to Professor Andrea Sochelli and colleagues in the Department of Philosophy for their efforts in establishing this important center. And our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Toby Ord from Oxford University, for kicking off the lecture series with his presentation on existential risk. HKCRC strives to pursue the study of a range of risk-related issues through an interdisciplinary approach and aims to promote a common understanding and awareness of risk. A number of renowned overseas universities, such as the University of Cambridge, the University of Oxford, and UC Berkeley, have established research centers of a similar nature. Riding on a strength in interdisciplinary research, Lingnan has decided to establish HKCRC, the first of its kind in Asia. As we know, human beings have come a long way in improving their lives through the exploitation of nature and the inventions and systematic application of science. Yet, the risks associated with powerful emerging technologies and excessive human activities could pose catastrophic or even existential risks, including, but not limited to, environmental degradation, destructive artificial intelligence, nuclear apocalypse, cyber terrorism, and of course, global pandemic like the one we have all experienced over the past 2 years. Catastrophic risks can only be tackled when academic researchers, industry experts, businesses, and government come together to share their knowledge and insights and formulate effective solutions. Lingnan University, committed to impactful research with both local relevance and international resonance, is proud to contribute to this global effort through the establishment of HKCRC. In the past few years, Lingnan has strongly supported the promotion of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, UN SDGs, for the betterment of humankind. Disaster risk reduction is a core development strategy in association with many of the SDGs. The launch of the HKCRC is one of the strategic initiatives that signifies our dedication to addressing societal needs and promoting sustainable development, especially in the area of environment, AI, healthcare, and well-being, as set out in our Strategic Plan 2022 to 28. I'm confident that HKCRC will serve as an important platform for interdisciplinary research that will contribute to policy formulation and benefit the humanity. I wish the HKCRC every success and hope you will all enjoy the insightful presentation by Professor Ord and the Q&A sessions with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So let me add a few more words on the center before we show the recorded talk. At least initially, the center will be on the philosophical and ethical aspects of the risks mentioned by the president. For example, how can we better define the key central concepts of catastrophic, existential risks, the concept of well-being, the ethics of risk imposition, our duties to future generations. We will then discuss problems in decision theory related to thinking about uncertain events and other specific issues connected to particular risks, such as the alignment problem in AI. Of course, we look forward to establishing connections with the centers around the world, mentioned again by the president, and also with other researchers and units interested in these topics, both within our university, like the science unit, the psychology department, and in Hong Kong, and in the rest of Asia. We will organize academic seminars, workshops, but also events for the more general public to disseminate our research. We are putting the final touches, the finishing touches to a website, and we will keep you posted through our Twitter and Facebook accounts of all these initiatives. Now, Professor Ord's pre-recorded talk is based on his recent book, The Precipice, and is about a kind of catastrophic risks, existential risks. These are risks of events that would bring about the extinction of humanity or the destruction of humanity's long-term potential. Professor Ord is a senior research fellow at Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute. His work focuses on the big picture questions facing humanity. Professor Ord's early work explored the ethics of global health and global poverty. He created an international society called Giving What We Can, and also co-founded the wider effective altruism movement. His current research is on the long-term future of humanity. And his new book, The Precipice, he argues that safeguarding our future is among the most pressing and neglected issues we face. So now let's enjoy, so to speak, the talk.
In the grand course of human history, where do we stand? Could we be living at one of the most influential times there will ever be? Our species, Homo sapiens, arose on the savannas of Africa 200,000 years ago. What set us apart from the other animals was both our intelligence and our ability to work together to build something greater than ourselves. From an ecological perspective, it was not a human that was remarkable, but humanity. And crucially, we were able to cooperate across time as well as space. If each generation had to learn everything anew, then even a crude iron shovel would have been forever beyond our reach. But we learned from our ancestors, added innovations of our own, and passed this all down to our children. Instead of dozens of humans in cooperation, we had tens of thousands, cooperating across the generations, preserving and improving ideas through deep time. Little by little, our knowledge and our culture grew. At several points in humanity's long history, there has been a great transition, a change in human affairs that accelerated our progress and shaped everything that would follow. 10,000 years ago was the agricultural revolution. Farming could support 100 times as many people on the same piece of land, making much wider cooperation possible. Instead of a few dozen people working together, we could have millions. This allowed people to specialize in thousands of different trades. There were rapid developments in institutions, culture, and technology. We developed writing, mathematics, engineering, law. We established civilization. 400 years ago was the scientific revolution. The scientific method replaced a reliance on received authorities with careful observation of the natural world, seeking simple and testable explanations for what we saw. The ability to test and discard bad explanations helped us break free from dogma and allowed for the first time the systematic creation of knowledge about the workings of nature. Some of this newfound knowledge could be harnessed to improve the world around us, so the accelerated accumulation of knowledge brought with it an acceleration of technological innovation, giving humanity increasing power over the natural world. 200 years ago was the Industrial Revolution. This was made possible by the discovery of immense reserves of energy in the form of fossil fuels, allowing us access to a portion of the sunlight that shone upon the Earth over millions of years. Productivity and prosperity began to accelerate, and a rapid sequence of innovations ramped up the efficiency, scale, and variety of automation, giving rise to the modern era of sustained growth. But there has recently been another transition, that I believe is more important than any that have come before. With the detonation of the first atomic bomb, a new age of humanity began. At that moment, our rapidly accelerating technological power finally reached the threshold where we might be able to destroy ourselves. The first point where the threat to humanity from within exceeded the threats from the natural world. A point where the entire future of humanity hangs in the balance, where every advance our ancestors have made could be squandered, and every advance our descendants may achieve could be denied. These threats to humanity, and how we address them, define our time. The advent of nuclear weapons posed a real risk of human extinction in the 20th century. With the continued acceleration of technology, and without serious efforts to protect humanity, there is strong reason to believe the risk will be higher this century, and increasing with each century that technological progress continues. Because these anthropogenic risks outstrip all natural risks combined, they set the clock on how long humanity has left to pull back from the brink. If I'm even roughly right about their scale, then we cannot survive many centuries with risk like this. It is an unsustainable level of risk. Thus, one way or another, this new period is unlikely to last more than a small number of centuries. Either humanity takes control of its destiny and reduces the risk to a sustainable level, or we destroy ourselves. Consider human history as a grand journey through the wilderness. There are wrong turns and times of hardship, but also times of sudden progress and heady views. In the middle of the 20th century, we came through a high mountain pass and found that the only route onward was a narrow path along the cliffside, a crumbling ledge on the brink of a precipice. Looking down brings a deep sense of vertigo. If we fall, everything is lost. We do not know just how likely we are to fall, but it is the greatest risk to which we have ever been exposed. This comparatively brief period is a unique challenge in the history of our species. Our response to it will define our story. Historians of the future will name this time, and school children will study it. But I think we need a name now. I call it the precipice. The precipice gives our time immense meaning. In the grand course of history, if we make it that far, this is what our time will be remembered for. For the highest levels of risk, and for humanity opening its eyes, coming into its maturity, and guaranteeing its long and flourishing future. This is the meaning of our time. I am not glorifying our generation, nor am I vilifying us. The point is that our actions have uniquely high stakes. Whether we are great or terrible will depend upon what we do with this opportunity. I hope we live to tell our children and grandchildren that we did not stand by, but used this chance to play the part that history gave us. Humanity's future is ripe with possibility. We have achieved a rich understanding of the world we inhabit, and a level of health and prosperity of which our ancestors could only dream. We have begun to explore the other worlds in the heavens above us, and to create virtual worlds completely beyond our ancestors' comprehension. We know of almost no limits to what we might ultimately achieve. Human extinction would foreclose our future. It would destroy our potential. It would eliminate all possibilities but one, a world bereft of human flourishing. Extinction would bring about this failed world and lock it in forever. There would be no coming back. But it is not the only way our potential could be destroyed. Consider a world in ruins, where a catastrophe has done such damage to the environment that civilization has completely collapsed and is unable to ever be re-established. Even if such a catastrophe did not cause our extinction, it would have a similar effect on our future. The vast realm of futures currently open to us would have collapsed to a narrow range of meager options. We would have a failed world with no way back. Or consider a world in chains, where the entire world has become locked under the rule of an oppressive totalitarian regime determined to perpetuate itself. If such a regime could be maintained indefinitely, then descent into this totalitarian future would also have much in common with extinction, just a narrow range of terrible futures remaining and no way out. What all of these possibilities have in common is that humanity's once soaring potential has been permanently destroyed. Not just the loss of everything we have, but the loss of everything we could have ever achieved. Any such outcome is called an existential catastrophe, and the risk of it occurring, an existential risk. There are different ways of understanding what makes an existential catastrophe so bad. In the Precipice, I explore 5 different moral foundations for the importance of safeguarding humanity from existential risks. Our concern could be rooted in the present, the immediate toll such a catastrophe would take on everyone alive at the time it struck. Our concern could be rooted in the future, stretching so much further than our own moment, everything that would be lost. Or in the past, on how we would fail every generation that came before us. We could also make a case based on virtue, on how, by risking our entire future, humanity itself displays a staggering deficiency of patience, prudence, and wisdom. Or we could make a case based on our cosmic significance, on how this might be the only place in the universe where there is intelligent life, the only chance for the universe to understand itself, or the only beings who can deliberately shape the future towards what is good or just. The importance of protecting humanity's potential thus draws support from a wide range of ideas and moral traditions. I will say a little more on the future and the past. The case based on the future is the one that inspires me most. If all goes well, human history is just beginning. Humanity is about 200,000 years old, but the Earth will remain habitable for hundreds of millions more, enough time for millions of future generations, enough to end disease, poverty, and injustice forever, enough to create heights of flourishing unimaginable today. And if we could learn to reach out further into the cosmos, we could have more time yet, trillions of years to explore billions of worlds. Such a lifespan places present-day humanity in its earliest infancy. A vast and extraordinary adulthood awaits. This is the long-termist argument for safeguarding humanity's potential. Our future could be so much longer and better than our fleeting present, and there are actions that only our generation can take that would affect that entire span of time. This could be understood in terms of all the value in all the lives in every future generation, or in many other terms, because, in expectation, almost all of humanity's life lies in the future, so almost everything of value lies in the future as well. Almost all the flourishing, almost all the beauty, our greatest achievements, our most just societies, our most profound discoveries. This is our potential, what we could achieve if we pass the precipice and continue striving for a better world. But this isn't the only way to make a case for the pivotal importance of existential risk. Consider our relationship to the past. We are not the first generation. Our cultures, institutions and norms, our knowledge, technology and prosperity were gradually built up by our ancestors over the course of 10,000 generations. Humanity's remarkable success has been entirely reliant on our capacity for intergenerational cooperation. Without it, we would have no houses or farms. We would have no traditions of dance or song, no writing, no nations. Indeed, when I think of the unbroken chain of generations leading to our time, and of everything they have built for us, I am humbled. I am overwhelmed with gratitude, shocked by the enormity of the inheritance, and at the impossibility of returning even the smallest fraction of the favour, because 100 billion of the people to whom I owe everything are gone forever, and because what they created is so much larger than my life, than my entire generation. If we were to drop the baton, succumbing to an existential catastrophe, we would fail our ancestors in many different ways. We would fail to achieve the dreams they hoped for as they worked towards building a just world. We would betray the trust they placed in us, their heirs, to preserve and pass on their legacy. and we would fail in any duty we had to pay forward the work they did for us, to help the next generation as they helped ours. Moreover, we would lose everything of value from the past that we might have reason to preserve. Extinction would bring with it the ruin of every cathedral and temple, the erasure of every poem in every tongue, the final and permanent destruction of every cultural tradition the earth has known. In the face of serious threats of extinction, or of a permanent collapse of civilization, a tradition rooted in preserving or cherishing the richness of humanity would also cry out for action. We don't often think of things at this scale. Ethics is most commonly addressed from the individual perspective. What should I do? Occasionally, it is considered from the perspective of a group or nation, or even, more recently, from the global perspective of everyone alive today. We can take this a step further, exploring ethics from the perspective of humanity. Not just our present generation, but humanity over deep time, reflecting on what we achieved in the last 10,000 generations, and what we may be able to achieve in the aeons to come. This perspective is a major theme of my book. It allows us to see how our own time fits into the greater story, and how much is at stake. It changes the way we see the world and our role in it, shifting our attention from things that affect the present moment to those that could make fundamental alterations to the shape of the long-term future. What matters most for humanity? And what part in this plan should our generation play? What part should each of us play? The Precipice has 3 chapters on the risks themselves, delving deeply into the science behind them. There's the natural risks, the current anthropogenic risks, and the emerging risks. One of the most important conclusions is that these risks aren't equal. The stakes are similar, but some risks are much more likely than others. I show how we can use the fossil record to bound the entire natural risk to about a 1 in 10,000 chance per century. But I judge the existing anthropogenic risk to be about 30 times larger, and the emerging risk to be about 50 times larger again, roughly 1 in 6 over the coming century. Russian roulette. This makes a huge difference when it comes to our priorities. Though it doesn't quite mean that everyone should work on the most likely risks, we also care about their tractability and neglectedness, the quality of the opportunity at hand, and for direct work, your personal fit. What we do with our future is up to us. Our choices will determine whether we live or die, fulfill our potential, or squander our chance at greatness. We are not hostages to fortune. While each of our lives may be tossed about by external forces, a sudden illness, or outbreak of war, humanity's future is almost entirely within humanity's control. In the Precipice, I examine what I call grand strategy for humanity. I ask what kind of plan would give humanity the greatest chance of achieving our full potential. I divide things into 3 phases. The first great task for humanity is to reach a place of safety, a place where existential risk is low and stays low. I call this existential security. This requires us to do the work commonly associated with reducing existential risk, lowering the risk we face by working to diffuse the various threats. And it also requires putting in place the norms and institutions to ensure existential risk stays low forever. This really is within our power. There appear to be no major obstacles to humanity lasting many millions of generations, if only that were a key global priority. There will be great challenges in getting people to look far enough ahead and to see beyond the parochial conflicts of the day. But the logic is clear, and the moral arguments powerful. It can be done. But that is not the end of our journey. Achieving existential security would give us room to breathe. With humanity's long-term potential secured, we would be past the precipice, free to contemplate the range of futures that lie open before us. And we will be able to take our time to reflect upon what we truly desire, upon which of these visions for humanity would be the best realization of our potential. We shall call this the long reflection. We rarely think this way. We focus on the here and now. Even those of us who care deeply about the long-term future need to focus most of our attention on making sure we have a future. But once we achieve existential security, we will have as much time as we need to compare the kinds of futures available to us and judge which is best. Most work in moral philosophy so far has focused on negatives, on avoiding wrong action and bad outcomes. The study of the positive is at a much earlier stage of development. During the long reflection, we would need to develop mature theories that allow us to compare the grand accomplishments our descendants might achieve with aeons and galaxies as their canvas. While moral philosophy would play a central role, the long reflection would require insights from many disciplines. For it isn't just about determining which futures are best, but which are feasible in the first place, and which strategies are most likely to bring them about. This would require analysis from science, engineering, economics, political theory, and beyond. Our ultimate aim, of course, is the final step, fully achieving humanity's potential. But this can wait upon step 2, the serious reflection about which future is best, and on how to achieve that future without any fatal missteps. And while it wouldn't hurt to begin such reflection now, it is not the most urgent task. To maximize our chance of success, we need first to get ourselves to safety, to achieve existential security. Only we can make sure we get through this period of danger and give our children the very pages upon which they will author our future.
Okay. Toby is here. So, Professor Ord, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Is it okay if I call you Toby?
Oh, no problem.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, welcome again, and many thanks for joining us today. So we watched your pre-recorded talk, was based on the Precipice, was terrific and terrifying at the same time. Let's start with a few questions on maybe just to clarify the concept of an existential risk, so we know what we are talking about. If I understand it correctly, for an event to be an existential catastrophe is for this event to cause the irremediable destruction of our potential. And human extinction is just one way in which we can destroy our potential, but is not the only one. And an existential risk is basically the risk of one of these events occurring, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The idea is was created by Nick Bostrom, where the history of studying this, a lot of the focus was on nuclear war, and there were books about things like nuclear ethics, and that was where the real focus was. This changed a bit with John Leslie's book in, I think, 1996, which tried to look at human extinction from all kinds of causes. So that was kind of broadening it to this more natural class. And then Nick Bostrom did a similar step again in the early 2000s with the idea of existential risk, to say, well, human extinction is one of these things that has all of these properties, but there could be other things that are almost as bad, and an unrecoverable collapse of civilization could be an example, as could being stuck in some terrible dystopian society if there was no way out from there. And what they all have in common is that, yeah, we would lose our potential, and instead of having this soaring potential, we'd have this kind of fairly mediocre or miserable set of possibilities, or maybe just no possibilities at all.
Great. So, but let me ask you, what determines our potential? Is it the best of possible futures for humanity? Does humanity have an essence, or it has a specific way in which it flourishes, on your view?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The idea is to be neutral on the question of of the big picture questions about ethics, to say that whether it's a matter of something to do with well-being of all the future generations, or whether it's a matter of the achievements that we make, say that the greatest scientific discoveries, or the greatest artistic achievements, or perhaps the most just societies that we can create. No matter what it is, that human extinction would foreclose all of this. So it doesn't have to be a consequentialist conception of our potential. It could be very broad. And so the way I kind of think of it is that there's this huge set of all possible futures that we could realize. At the moment, that's truly vast. There's all the different ways that humans together and our descendants could act over the whole of time. And then there are certain events where that huge cloud of possibilities gets reduced down to some very small set, maybe just one future, because we don't get to do any acts ever again, or maybe a very small kind of set because we don't have access to the fruits of civilization. And then I don't know which among this huge cloud of possibilities is the best. And I really want to be neutral on that, but I don't think that's part of the idea of existential risk, to prejudge that. But whatever it is, it's very unlikely that it's in this set that we collapse into. So that's how I think of it.
Okay, great. So in the book, you elaborate also in terms of 3 dimensions, right? Duration, scale, and quality. Can you comment on the last of these, like quality?
Yeah. Duration is, I think, the most intuitive, perhaps.
Yeah.
That if we live 10 times as long, that very plausibly is 10 times better. The idea that if there were 10 times as many people or something, or is a kind of a larger scale, is less intuitive, and I'm not sure if it's true or not. And then quality is to say that it's not just a matter of how big and how long lasting the human civilization is. There's a question of what we do with it. So we can easily see how the quality could be lower. Maybe it could be half as high as it is now if our lives were worse in various ways that we've seen throughout history. And so we clearly care about how good at any one, for any one life things are going. But I also think that it's possible that it could be much better than it is now. And we can see that in terms of the fact that lifespans now are about twice as long as they were 200 years ago. That's kind of one way, but also that we're much more prosperous and we're much more free in many ways. And I think that's improved our lives a lot. We can choose who to marry in most cases now, instead of having arranged marriages. And we're free from many different diseases. So I think that we could continue in those directions, and perhaps go beyond the lives that anyone has managed to live so far in terms of quality.
Great. So I think it's sufficiently clear the concept of existential risk. Let's move on to the arguments that you give for caring about existential risks. Do you think that the future-oriented argument is the best in your view? The best?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure if it's the one that would convince the most people, or that meets the most people where they are. I think that the one that meets the most people where they are is probably the present-directed one that says, well, if there was extinction, then that would, in most cases, mean everyone dying. You could also have cases where it's, say, infertility-related extinction. But the kind of tragedy for all of the people who were alive at the time, however it happens, seems to be, uncontroversial. But the fact that the loss of the future could be so much greater than that is what motivates me to want to spend my life on this issue.
Great. I like it that you try to make a case that would appeal also to, let's say, conservatives, like people interested in preserving cultural heritage by looking at the past. I read in your book that there was a passage by Edmund Burke, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like this approach and attempt to including, to convince people from different moral standpoints Anyway, can you in the presentation, it's just briefly mentioned the significance argument. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, the cosmic significance.
Yeah, cosmic significance argument. Yes.
Yeah. So this has been a prominent argument for many of the people who've cared about existential risk, and many of the early writers on this topic. For example, Carl Sagan, who wrote one of the first. He's one of the first people to really grasp this idea that that there's this kind of discontinuity that would happen with extinction, where it wouldn't just be losing the present generation, but this loss of the entire future. And Martin Rees and Carl Sagan, both cosmologists, and it's particularly common among cosmologists. Max Tegmark, who runs the Future of Life Institute, is another person who thinks that this cosmic significance is particularly important. That Earth might be the only place in the cosmos where people like us exist. And then there's a question about what people like us means in this argument. So in one case, it could be the only place where life exists. And so there may be some special duty that we have that arises from this cosmic uniqueness. So it could also be the only place where conscious beings exist. And if so that could give rise to special reasons. It could be the only place where beings that can come to know the laws of nature exist. And so I know Carl Sagan talked about this quite a lot, that there's this kind of aspect where Earth may be the part of the universe where the universe comes to understand itself. And I also think that there's a case for cosmic significance, that it might be the only part of the universe where there are beings that respond to moral reasons. So the only beings that are motivated to do what is good or just. So if we were to die out, there would still be life on Earth, but the other beings, the blackbirds aren't going to attempt to save the other species or to respond to moral reasons in some way. And so it could be that if we think that, if like Immanuel Kant, we're awed by both the starry heavens above us and the moral law within us, then it could be an additional tragedy if there's nowhere in the universe that moves towards what's good and just, and things just kind of evolve in a more meaningless manner. I should say I'm not sure whether there is a solid philosophical argument here. But I think there might be, and I wouldn't have included it if I didn't feel somewhat compelled by it. I get a feeling that one of these arguments may well work. If you wanted to put pressure on it, though, you could ask the question: well, suppose there was somewhere else. There was a second place in the universe, very far away, that was unreachable. Would that really change the situation? It would still be the case that, say, the entire area around us, if we were to die, wouldn't be, there would be no beings that were acting towards making it good or just, and so on and so forth. So maybe there's a similar argument just to do with the cosmic scale or something like that. And that if you really wanted to run this cosmic significance and uniqueness argument, you'd have to disentangle it from the cosmic scale argument.
Well, I guess there is a live debate on the value of consciousness. Perhaps an argument for cosmic significance can be linked to this kind of more recent debates on the value of consciousness itself. But anyway, I think that overall the arguments are pretty solid, especially the future directed, which seems to me a kind of a version of the deprivational account of the badness of death applied to humanity intended as a big individual, as a big individual. But anyway, what I am really interested in hearing from you is your methodology. How did you get those scary numbers? So we know that there are many risks that threaten our potential. But before we look into some of them more in particular, you claim that there is like around 17% chances, 1/6,
Mhm.
1 in 6 chances that we don't make it in next century. Can you tell me more how you read this number?
So I guess I will. So it's funny that 17% and 1 in 6 in some sense are the same, but one of them implies that it's not 18% or something, whereas the implies a kind of false accuracy that it doesn't really have. Even 1 in 6 perhaps implies more accuracy than there really is. So this is less a case of methodology. It's not so much a result of the book. In the sense that, I wrote a paper and the conclusion of the paper is that the probability is 1 in 6. It's more a case of, I wrote a book on the possibility that humanity could go extinct, and the fact that this gives rise to one of the most important meanings of our time. I wanted to say something, because there are some other books, that try to tackle these themes that don't really say anything about the chances. And then you're left wondering, is the author saying that this is like a 1 in a million kind of thing, but it's still so significant that we should take it seriously? Or are they saying it's more likely than not to happen, such that if it didn't happen, we could point our finger at them and say, you got it wrong? So this is something where I care a lot about the epistemology of thinking about the future and making predictions and making falsifiable predictions and so on. Some of these are not so falsifiable, or at least, I guess it could be falsifiable in the period of time before the asteroid strikes or something like that, while we're looking at the skies and despairing. But it's something where, I think that the Bayesian approach to making predictions and updating on evidence is pretty good, and expressing one's credences, and then kind of playing the game of putting yourself out there with some credences, so that if you're wrong, other people can know. So we would talk about this a lot at the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford, and try to get a feeling for how the risk breaks down between these different causes. For some of the areas, in particular the natural risks, you can do something somewhat sensible to get numbers on these things based on repeatable events. But for the anthropogenic cases, unfortunately, the time period is so short that these things are unprecedented during human history. So it's much harder to actually give solid answers that you could force everyone to agree on. So what I've done instead is more report my own credences to let people know, because I thought it would be a disservice to the reader to not let them know what I actually think about these things. And that they may be interested to find someone who's been thinking about this for a decade and reading a lot of the science and so forth, to see what they think. But it's not in any way trying to say you have to have these credences, that these are objective things that you're going to be forced into as well.
Okay, so I suppose that, for example, for some risks, you ask or you looked at results, credences of experts in different fields. Suppose, like for AI, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is there an agreement among the experts on existential risks about the likelihood of humanity not making it?
No. And similarly, there's not an agreement among AI scientists about when and if AI will come. What's most interesting about those surveys, the first point of summary or something would be to say there's wild disagreement between the experts. Sometimes that's a useful thing to have found out. And so in the case of AI, you sometimes hear that someone will mention a particular AI scientist and say, well, he thinks there's no chance this will happen. And once you're aware that the field is very divided on this, and that they have very different predictions to each other, you then realize that person's not representative of the group. And that you can find a median for the group, like find the number beyond which half of them think that AI will have happened. And that answer to that is, I think it's something like 40 years from now. To reach human level AI. But there is still very big disagreement. And there's a similar situation when it comes to the experts on existential risk. There are some people, particularly those who are very concerned about AI risk, who put the risk this century, close to 100%. And you often do hear that from individuals as well. I find that when I, tell my story about my concerns, some people say, well, this is ridiculous to think that we could live for millions of years. There's just not that much future to save. It's overdetermined that we're going to die soon, in the next couple of centuries. So sometimes I hear that, a very despairing kind of view. And sometimes I get the opposite, that obviously there's almost no chance. And they can't both be good criticisms of my position, but it's interesting to see just how variable the views on this are. And even in the community, I think that you'll find people who think that there's less than 1 in 1,000 chance of human extinction or other existential catastrophe this century, and people who think it's more than 90%. So very wide variability.
All right. Okay. Still not reassuring enough.
No, if you averaged, if you average together the numbers of the different people, you might get something in the vicinity of 10 to 20% or something like that. That would be my guess. Somewhere around about where I am. But it's quite sensitive to there aren't that many people trying to do this, and it really is fair to say we do not know what these anthropogenic risks are, as in how high the risks are.
Okay, well, I think the natural risks are probably, as you said, easier to ascribe a probability to.
Mm-hmm.
But let's focus on the anthropogenic risks, because I think that they are. I think you pointed out that they are more substantial risks. Let's start with a global nuclear war or nuclear weapons. So in the past, we got very close to a catastrophe or even existential catastrophe in several occasions. But in the book, you say that the existential risk does not seem to be directly related to the immediate destruction of the detonation of nuclear bombs. Is it correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it comes to nuclear war, our current best guess, this changed over time. It is quite interesting to delve into, in that the atomic scientists who were building the first nuclear weapons, they thought that it could lead to the extinction of humanity, even though they really didn't know how big the explosions were going to be and how many bombs there could be and so forth. But it was such a discontinuous change in the history of warfare that it really brought that onto the table. And then after a while, people thought that maybe nuclear fallout could be what could do it. Radioactive particles of dust falling back down and causing radiation. But it turned out that there weren't going to be enough nuclear weapons, even with the thermonuclear weapons to kill everyone by that means. There might be in the future if we get a Cold War that becomes 10 times as big a stockpile as we'd had in the past. But at the moment, that doesn't look like the threat. But then in the 1980s, Carl Sagan and others discovered this mechanism of nuclear winter. And it was at around about the same time that the astronomers were realizing that a similar mechanism from an asteroid impact leading to an asteroid winter, that's what killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And so we think that burning buildings, creating huge amounts of black soot, which gets lofted up so high into the atmosphere by extremely hot flames that it can't get rained out and cools the earth for a number of years. We think that that's what would be the biggest risk of global catastrophe, and say the possibility of billions of people dying would come from that, and the possibility of permanent collapse or extinction. But the reason that I put the overall chance at something like 1 in 1,000 over the next century for nuclear war isn't that I think that the chance of a nuclear war is 1 in 1,000. I think it's higher than that. It's that with our current understanding of nuclear winter, it's hard to see how it could cause human extinction. is one of the things. It's even hard to see how it could cause a complete collapse of civilization. And even if it did, I think there's every chance that civilization would recover, since we know that civilization has been created at least 5 times independently in different parts of the world, from hunter-gatherer societies. So it's these types of reasons that and I think some experts would say even lower than I would, because they just can't see how, like experts in nuclear winter, because it's difficult to see how it could really drive the population quite that low. They're concerned principally with billions of people dying, which is indeed a reasonable thing to be concerned about. I'm just trying to focus on this further question.
Right. One of the things that worried me, among many others, is that reading your book, the unilateral decisions that were made in the past by some researchers involved in the Manhattan Project. Can you tell us what happened? Basically, they were worried that they could burn out all the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, this concerns me a lot too. In some ways, this was the first existential risk, and there was they gathered together in Oppenheimer's office in Berkeley. The group of people who were going to lead the Manhattan Project, and it was a conversation in the summer about what would be needed to create an atomic weapon. And Edward Teller gave a presentation about what he called the super, which was the idea for a thermonuclear weapon, the hydrogen bomb. So he'd actually come up with that already, even before they started building the original atomic bomb. And when he was coming up with it, he thought, if you had an explosion, an extremely hot explosion that could only be caused by a fission bomb, you might get things hot enough that you could create a fusion reaction. And so he was interested in this. Fusion is of course the type of nuclear reaction that makes the sun burn. And yeah, he was thinking about this. And then he noticed, hang on a second, maybe you wouldn't even need special fuel. Maybe just the air around us, the nitrogen in the air, is combustible in a fusion reaction. And as would be the hydrogen in seawater. Just as the sun burns on hydrogen, maybe the hydrogen in our water, in our oceans, could burn. So this has kind of been called the igniting the atmosphere problem. That maybe it would be hot enough that it would just cause this fusion reaction that would burn off the whole atmosphere of the Earth and thereby sterilize the Earth's surface. So he was concerned about this. Oppenheimer thought it was a serious concern. They weren't allowed to fly back then because these people were considered too important by the nation. So he kind of got the train and sped across to meet his superior and tell them. And when he got back, people were a bit calmer. As one of the other scientists who'd got a Nobel Prize for working on fusion and in fact discovering what makes the sun burn, had said, actually, it's not going to be a problem because the explosion will dissipate. And so that the temperature will cool because it will be spreading out. And so it won't remain hot enough to do the fusion. And he was pretty confident in that. That's Hans Bethe. But a lot of disagreement remained. And it sounded like Bethe had the right side of the argument, or at least the stronger side of the argument, but it was far from a foregone conclusion. And they continued to debate it. A report was commissioned by the Manhattan Project while they were making the atomic bomb. And the report it's often said that the report put this concern to bed, but the report concludes that more research is needed. And if you're making a weapon that people are concerned that it will destroy humanity, and then your conclusion is more research is needed, that's not a reason to detonate that weapon. And even up until the day of the Trinity test, Fermi and others were still deeply concerned about this and running more calculations. And when it exploded, one of the senior officials who'd been told about this, he thought when the explosion was much brighter than expected that they actually had ignited the atmosphere and that they were all going to die. And also the German scientists discovered this possibility too. And that news of that actually got all the way up to Hitler. who sometimes apparently joked about that, that we're not going to get atomic power for many centuries to come, but when we do, perhaps his 1,000-year Reich will be destroyed as the Earth becomes a new star, as they unleash these kinds of unholy powers. So it was a concern. Interestingly, under the Nazis, it actually got all the way up to the top. In the US, the news of this actually stopped, and it's not clear that any elected officials actually heard about it. And the army made the decision to go ahead with the test. And even though early on, the motivations for the atomic scientists was that they wanted to avoid Hitler having unopposed nuclear weapons, by the time of the Trinity test, Hitler was dead and Germany had surrendered. So it's not clear why they would want to unilaterally and I think illegitimately expose humanity and life on Earth to this risk when there wasn't even some other alternative.
Okay, thank you. Well, what can I say?
Yeah.
1 in 6.
Well, and one of the other aspects there is that that you might think that, well, I guess Hans Bethe was right, and he was a very smart guy, and he his argument won the day. But they did actually, on that same day in Oppenheimer's office, they started another calculation over that summer, which was for making one of these fusion weapons, the thermonuclear weapons. And it concluded that there were 2 isotopes of lithium, and one of them would have to get removed because it was going to be inert and wouldn't contribute to the blast. And they were wrong about that, deeply wrong about it. And it turns out they made this weapon for the so-called Castle Bravo nuclear test.
Right.
And they didn't finish purifying the lithium. And it turns out that the lithium they thought would be inert contributed, and the blast was several times larger than they expected. It was the largest nuclear blast that the US ever produced. It then irradiated a much larger area, including parts that should have been evacuated, and caused an international incident because it irradiated a Japanese fishing boat, not long after Hiroshima. So that was a major mistake, that effectively there was, they just neglected, they just assumed that this type of atom wouldn't contribute, and they were just wrong about that. And in fact, it produced most of the energy. So it's not that this group of scientists get every second thing wrong, but it does show that you can't just say, well, they were very smart people, so it turned out okay, and that's because they were so smart. Some of the things they tried didn't work.
Right, and again, looking at one of the appendixes in your book, where you list a lot of nuclear weapon accidents, one says a nuclear bomb in 1957, a nuclear bomb accidentally fell through the bomb bay doors of a B-36 bomber over New Mexico. Oops, a bomb has just fallen. The high explosive detonated, but there was no nuclear explosion. Another accident says a fighter jet carrying a 1 megaton bomb, so it's way more powerful than what was detonated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, fell off the side of a US aircraft carrier near Japan. The bomb was never recovered. I mean, the problem may not only lie with the scientists, but also with the people actually carrying these weapons and operating these deadly weapons. I mean, they distributed so many of them around the world, that it just magnified, the possibilities of losing control of these materials and the possibilities of having an accidental launch or accidental detonation. From the perspective of existential risk, the scariest possibilities are accidental launch against the Soviets, which then could trigger a nuclear war that's of a scale where humanity could be destroyed, potentially. It is pretty alarming, and they once some ICBMs were created, intercontinental missiles,
it's very short time between them being launched and them being detonated, and so then everything becomes on a hair trigger where you've got to get ready to launch your missiles. Otherwise, the first wave of attacks from your enemy might be to just destroy all your missiles, and you won't get to fight back. So they had to choose very quickly, and then this kind of created additional tensions, and there's still remnants of this going on at the moment. My advice would be that they should get rid of the ICBMs, because they create this strategic instability, where it's like a kind of gunslinger in the Wild West who's very quick to draw their pistol, and you need to be very quick to draw your pistol because they might be quick, and this could lead to someone being shot when they were just trying to get their wallet out or something like that.
Okay, so well, thanks. Let's move on to climate change. Surprisingly, you don't, well, surprising for some people at least, you don't think that poses a particularly pressing existential risk, right?
I'm not sure what I would say about climate and nuclear war in terms of how pressing they are. I mean, if suppose that they were the only things that I found posed any existential risk, I think I would have written a somewhat similar book and said that there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that we don't make it through the century, and this is really terrible, and it's a really important feature of our time. So I do think that in both cases there are a lot of similarities. One of the similarities is that if we look at the science of climate change, it's very difficult to see how it could actually cause human extinction. And the same is true with nuclear weapons. We can see how they could cause unprecedentedly large alterations to the climate, as in unprecedented in human history, but perhaps not unprecedented in the geological record. And this should scare us. And you certainly can't guarantee that if you do some unprecedented thing that you're going to be okay at the end of it. But if you look through and try to understand, well, what actually could happen if temperatures were, say, 5 degrees or even 10 degrees warmer than they are now. And it is still actually very difficult to understand how this could destroy humanity. But some people who look at existential risk conclude, therefore, that there isn't an existential risk from these things. And I guess I could have gone in that direction. Instead, I think it's more that we're not yet sure. Just the fact that scientists can't see how it could happen doesn't mean it couldn't happen. So up until 1980, the scientists couldn't see how nuclear war could actually destroy humanity, or that it could pose these global threats. And then a mechanism was discovered. And it could be like that with these things. So I think it's in this kind of situation of ambiguity. It's not that we know a nice clean number and we know the mechanism and so on. The number that I'm giving is more to represent that there's a possibility that there really is a mechanism whereby it could kill us all. I should say that there's also the possibility of a collapse that we can't recover from. And some of my colleagues, particularly over at the Cambridge Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, CSER, are more bearish than I am about collapse, and they think that it's. I'd be interested to know their numbers actually, like as in their credences on these things. But they're significantly more concerned that it could cause a collapse of civilization and that we wouldn't be able to recover from it. Whereas maybe I'm on the more optimistic end about that. But maybe we'd agree with each other that extinction is a difficult thing for it to cause.
Perhaps here we can mention your idea of a risk factor. Maybe taken individually, this existential risks may not may interact with each other, and then combined together may actually lead to an existential catastrophe.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be existential risks combining. It could be anything. So various forms of, say, resource scarcity might not pose an existential risk, but it might be that existential risk is higher in a world of resource scarcity than it would be in a world of not resource scarcity. Or, for example, major conventional wars between great powers might not be able to cause existential risk, but a 21st century where we have great power war maybe have substantially higher risk, because then we have these great powers or superpowers that are having trouble coordinating and cooperating with each other on the things that really are the risks. So the idea of a risk factor is, anything is a risk factor if it increases the amount of existential risk. And then it's a useful concept because it shows us that we shouldn't just obsess about, if those of us who care about existential risk and want to focus on fighting it, shouldn't just obsess about working on a particular risk or a particular hazard, such as asteroids. Asteroids do, I think, pose some existential risk, but it's so small that that you might be better off working on how to avoid great power war. So working on that part of the question of international peace than you are working on something like asteroid impacts. So, and I think that what you're getting at is that climate change, the non-existential parts of climate change, just these huge stresses it's putting on both countries, but also on the international community, and the blame game and various things between countries, and it's also using a lot of our conversation time, at these most important fora like the United Nations, where we could be starting to talk about how should we govern AI and other kinds of questions as they come up. So I think that a world where we just knew that climate change was solved would have noticeably lower existential risk than our world. And so that's at least a way in which climate change is an existential risk factor, as well as being a risk itself.
Oh, since you mentioned it, let's move on to AI, and which I think is the among the emerging technologies is the one that bothers you the most. So, what aspects of AI actually worry you? Why would that be a problem?
Yeah, I think that the clearest answer is this kind of very bird's eye view perspective of it, which is that if we look at this kind of long story of humanity over 200,000 years, or now since I wrote the book, it seems like it's converging on 300,000 years of history of humanity, and we look at how we got to where we are, and what was special about us among the other animals, and so on. And while there are many things that are special about us, perhaps including our conscious inner lives and certain richness of this and so forth, what put us in this commanding position where what happens to the other species is kind of up to us, was not our strength or our speed, but our intelligence, and particularly our collective intelligence, our ability over deep time to kind of accumulate knowledge and technology, but it was our cognitive abilities, and that we're unrivaled at. But we're now trying to create entities that would be more intelligent than us, that would be better than us on the very attributes that put us in control of the future, and that mean that, as I said, there's this huge cloud of possibilities of potential futures that we could create, and which one we choose is ultimately going to be a product of human choices. But maybe it won't be. If we create entities that have their own goals and which are more intellectually capable than us, it could very well be they who are choosing the future from among these possibilities. And at the moment, we really don't know how to make it so that the ideal world that they would choose is also the kind of anything like the ideal world that we would choose, rather than a fairly dystopian future for us. There are people who are trying to do that. This is called alignment research, where they're trying to work out how to make the goals or utility functions of AIs kind of map onto the utility functions that humans have. But this is a very early stage. And at the moment, it looks like it may well be that we get the capabilities to have these intelligent systems before we're able to actually point them in the right direction. So that's at its broadest level, the type of concern, that unlike in the other cases where there's an asteroid or something, the asteroid doesn't try to wipe out every last human settlement. And it's a mindless threat that we can use our intelligence and our versatility to try to get around. Whereas if it was an AI, it may not have any motivation to actually to kill all the humans, but it would still want to disempower us, to make it so that maybe we're interested in interesting things to study in the same way that we might study, mice or fruit flies in the lab. But we wouldn't want mice or fruit flies to kind of like live out their greatest future at the expense of ours.
And you're not particularly worried about robots going around and destroying us. I mean, the takeover might take different forms, right?
Yeah, so I sketch kind of a beginning of this in the book. I mean, I think it would be interesting to have people, sketch, many different possibilities and to go further than I did. Ultimately, if we look at individual humans who, through their cognitive abilities, have managed to achieve great power, if we think about, say, people like Hitler or Stalin or Genghis Khan, it's kind of not been because they're the strongest people who are able to kind of physically wrestle everyone else to the ground or something. It's that they've convinced other people to do their bidding, that they've escalated their power in this way. And so my concern would be that just as they did that through their words, that it'll be through words that this kind of thing happens. You can kind of see this maybe more clearly during the pandemic, where we don't physically go and see each other, but individuals can still have kind of great effects on shaping what happens in the world by what they post on social media and what they email to people and what they convince people to do. So if you had a AI system that had a goal that wasn't good for the future of humanity, that system could, like human criminals, it could, because if it wasn't, bound by our normal moral sanctions against stealing and so on, it could create a botnet. So it could hack into a large number of computers, use those computers to create more copies of itself, set some of those copies to just hide and just activate themselves in 10 years' time or something, just in case the original is destroyed. At which point we're already in a lot of trouble, because unless we coordinated to destroy all the computers in the world, we might not be able to get rid of all of the copies of this thing. And then it could, if it could hack into bank accounts, or it could blackmail people by looking at the files on their computers and then kind of telling them they need to send it, cryptocurrency, or else it will email their friends with compromising pictures and things. That if you just kind of think of what a mafia or really bad criminal gang could do, that could devote a lot of attention to millions of different individuals and extort them all. I think it's pretty clear that it could escalate political power and perhaps get a candidate into office and then use that candidate and manipulate them and so on. That's the kinds of concerns about how it could kind of go about escalating power that I have, which are quite different to a Terminator type situation.
Okay, thanks. My very last question to you. We are running out of time. So this center is at the very beginning. Do you have any recommendations for us, suggestions on topics you think would be useful to work on, or anything you want to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, I'm really excited about the center. So it's great to be here today to help launch it. One thing, I mean, I think that with my book, there are a lot of loose ends. I think that we're at an early stage of looking at these things, especially when it comes to looking at existential risk in general. There are now, I don't know how many, but dozens of people working on AI existential risk in particular. But there aren't dozens of people working on existential risk in general and trying to kind of find the general principles that govern it. And so that's something where I'm not even sure that there are like 3 people full-time doing that. So additional people looking at the general questions of existential risk, I think, would be very helpful. And I also want to say that I'm actually very excited by what's going on at the United Nations at the moment. The Secretary General has launched this major report called Our Common Agenda, which is roughly a plan for his second term in office as to what he wants to achieve and how he thinks that he can lead the coordination of nations of the world in doing things that are in their best interests. And that report has, it mentions existential risk several times. And that's one of the motivating things. He has, I think, 7 different named proposals in the report to do with future generations, and also to do with existential and catastrophic risks. And he wants to develop these, and these are going to get discussed. And the text, for example, on a UN General Assembly declaration on future generations, which, think of it like the Declaration on Human Rights, but trying to kind of extend and confirm that the UN has an interest in protecting and helping to flourish for future generations. These texts and things are going to get sorted out at a summit of the future next year, 2023. So I think that's very exciting that there is a process, at the highest level internationally that is trying to get some of these ideas onto the agenda. So trying to see how the center could contribute to that, that there could be a really good way to participate in this global discussion. And another thing, I guess, to add like that is that at the moment, the discussion has been quite focused like in the West and the Anglosphere, and Oxford, I guess, in particular, or, if you say Oxford plus Cambridge, that's hardly increasing the diversity very much. So broadening that out and having more international perspectives is hugely needed. And so we really welcome international efforts on this.
Toby, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So now let's start with some questions from the public here. So maybe we can start. We can start with James and then Jesse.
Yeah, I like the question at the end.
Okay. So let's start with James. Microphone. Yeah, he's coming.
Well, thanks, Toby and Andrea, for the illuminating discussion. So my question has to do with your future-directed argument. So many of us think there's no moral duty or reason to bring people into existence. So morality doesn't require us to have children, for instance. But at least part of the case for preventing existential catastrophes seems to be based on the idea that we have a moral reason to keep humanity going, or to ensure that people keep coming into existence. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this apparent tension between our not having a moral reason to bring people into existence and our having a moral reason to ensure that future generations come into existence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those things would run together, such that if we didn't have a reason to bring individual humans into existence, then we probably wouldn't have a reason to bring future generations into existence. That might not be quite true. For example, there could be, I think that's probably true if they're intrinsic reasons or non-instrumental reasons. It could be the case if, for example, it's very important that certain strands of human culture continue, or that we reach kind of like destinations or higher peaks, or in some of our achievements. Maybe that doesn't depend upon me having an additional child, but it does depend upon humanity having some people that continue. So there could be some arguments like that, although I'm not trying to make them. Personally, I think that we have reasons to have children. So I would disagree with you on that. But I think that for the purposes of existential risk, it's a bit too, I think there's been a bit too much focus on that as a fault line. Whereas I think that the reason that in that chapter of the Precipice, I try to give a whole lot of different kind of reasons, including reasons based on the past, is that I think that even for people who are thoroughgoing person affecting people in terms of population ethics, I think that they still have a whole lot of reasons to want humanity to keep going. And I think that actually fleshing out those reasons would be quite useful. So I see it as a broad base on which there's a whole lot of different, perhaps incompatible approaches to this, but where most people are actually committed to one of those bases. And that there probably are some people who are not committed to one of these things, but I think that most people are, even if it's not the future directed one.
Got it. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so you argue that we have moral obligations to both people in the past and the future, right? You get both kinds of arguments. I thought I might kind of push back in both directions. In regards to the past, although also maybe somewhat to the future, like why or how do I have moral obligations to people who I've never met, who died long ago, who I can't communicate with, and might have views on justice that I think are reprehensible? And in the forward-looking direction, suppose the person's living in a third world country in terrible conditions. They don't have clean water or food. Right? There might be billions of people like this. Why should that person care about reaching existential security? And if that's right, is it necessary to first bring billions of people up to a minimum standard of living before we can really address all these other risks?
Yeah, so with the past directed one, I think that, yeah, I mean, I think you're entirely welcome to think that you don't have moral obligations to people in the past. I'm not sure that we do. So I don't mean to argue strongly for that. What I was trying to do is to suggest that there is a line of reasoning here, which I think that the type of person who's, say, a non-consequentialist and thinks that that it's not about the well-being of future generations may well instead agree with one of these other kind of strands. So I was kind of setting them up as different possibilities, not that we have to believe them all simultaneously. It's more disjunctive rather than conjunctive. With regard to the future, there could be people who are either have lives close to the point of being not worth living, or people who perhaps have lives which are worth living, but are easily improvable, and so are frustrated that their lives aren't being improved. That's a frustration that I entirely support and care about. I donate about a third of my income to help people in those situations. And I would be entirely sympathetic if they were trying to focus on their basic needs rather than to work on this. If that's just a matter of fact, I think that as someone who's in a privileged position to not be, in that desperate need, that it kind of behooves me to try to use my life to focus on the issues that I think are most important. So that's why I focus on it. It could be that we could, if it was the case that everyone was going to be just at this kind of life worth living line forever, then I guess there wouldn't be much of a reason from a future directed sense to care about saving the future of humanity. But I don't see that that's a good forecast, an accurate forecast for what's going to happen in the future. I think that we can do a lot better than that, and that we will.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to ask a question from a different angle. You are dealing with very important questions about human existence, or humans are forced to live under very undesirable conditions. That's a very big, very important thing to consider. I'd like to know, what are the advantages for you as a philosopher looking at these issues relative to scholars of history, religion, or scientists, or science fiction writers? So what would be the advantage you have coming from the philosophy discipline?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, maybe the science fiction writers are in a better position than me. I'm not sure. I think that this is a field that can benefit from lots of different perspectives. And I think that I learned a lot about history when I was getting into this project, and my writing on it wouldn't be anywhere near as good if I hadn't. So I think that the history of things, like we were just talking about, the history of the atomic bomb is extremely important to understanding our situation. And I think that what's sometimes called big history, looking at history, kind of these trends that have happened over hundreds of thousands of years and how humanity got to the position it is in, to try to forecast a bit about what might happen over hundreds of thousands of years following, is extremely important, as are various things in economics and lots of other disciplines. And science fiction authors are often able to really delve in depth into particular scenarios. Not that particular scenario is likely to happen, but they can ask questions about, could there be a terrible scenario that superficially looks good? And if they find one, that could be a useful warning for us. And they can also kind of explore particular cases in depths that we can't. So that's what these other people have to offer. What do philosophers have to offer? I think that one of the aspects that we have to offer is through moral philosophy, to try to understand the importance and the of this topic and the badness and the sources for the badness. Like, what would make it bad? How bad would it be? How should we prioritize it compared to other things? That's an area where philosophy, through moral philosophy, has particular kind of value to add. I think that there are also questions in epistemology that are important. Ultimately, existential risks are unprecedented, and at least in human history, we do have some examples like the asteroid, but that necessarily didn't happen in human history, the one that killed the dinosaurs. So we have this situation where, how are we supposed to even talk about the frequencies or probabilities of events that have not yet happened? And we can't just kind of say, oh, we'll just wait till it's happened 1,000 times and then take the average, because we'll be dead. So this is a kind of case of epistemology where our usual types of tools and the kind of scientific reliability that we usually demand can't be had. And so what can be had instead? What can we get? So there's examples of moral and epistemological questions concerning it. And I think that there are others too. And to some extent, the strengths of philosophers are that we have a kind of bird's eye view on a lot of these questions, and we're in a fairly interdisciplinary setup. So I think that that's certainly in my case has been very helpful. But I think it's a great question, and I'm not sure that I would say that the Precipice is a philosophy book more than it is one of these other disciplines that I've tried to dabble in and consult experts on.
Thank you for your enlightenment.
Thanks. And yet we have time for a very quick question. Derek.
Yeah, hi. So I guess this does fit in with the idea. Oh, sorry. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so this maybe fits in a little bit. So speaking of science fiction writers, the recent William Gibson stuff. So there's this there's this event in the future, the jackpot, where basically over a 100-year period, about 75% of humanity dies off. But the surviving 25%, after it's all done, have kind of a high standard of living. They live in these artificial environments, but they're mostly doing well. This seems like it's really bad, right, if this happens. And so I guess I'm a little worried with the focus on existential risk. That seems much less likely to me than things like global warming killing 2 to 3 billion people over a 100-year period. It probably won't drive us to extinction, but like there'll be a lot of dead people. And so I'm just curious why you think existential risk should be more of a focus than these really catastrophic events that seem much more likely but probably not existential.
So I think you're right that they're more likely. They needn't be. You could imagine probability distributions about catastrophic events where they're not. But I think that's more likely that 1 billion people will die than that more than 7 billion people will die, let's say. So then the question is, how bad are these different outcomes? And it's so if we say take that 3/4 case versus the everyone case, it's not just 1/3 worse if everyone dies though, because we lose the whole future. And from this kind of future directed kind of reasoning, we lose the many centuries that could be to come. We've had about 3,000 centuries so far of human civilization, human existence, and we could easily have thousands more to come. And so we lose all of that. So it could easily be the case that it's hundreds or thousands or more times worse if we get an event which destroys our potential. And then the question is, how much less likely is it? So if you look at my kind of best guesses, even in the case of nuclear war and climate, which we were previously saying were not very high numbers, a 1 in 1,000 chance, that might put it at, say, 10 or 100 times less likely than, even if we set aside the risks like AI, which are more speculative, it might be substantially less likely, but only a factor of 10 or 100 times less likely than these other events that merely kill billions of people. But I think that it would be more than 10 or 100 times worse. And so I think that that's a reason to have special focus. It's also the kind of event where we can't learn from trial and error, and so we have to kind of continually get it right the first time. And that requires a kind of special methodology and focus as well. So I think that there are a couple of reasons, but I don't think that people should not work on these other events. I think that people should definitely work on these other events as well. It's not necessarily an either or, but I'm explaining why I work on these ones.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just a little bit worried that once we start thinking about, 500,000 years of civilization in the future, where there's trillions of people. But any sort of kind of event that happens in, that doesn't amount to extinction is just going to be, that's pretty trivial compared to the benefit. So it doesn't
Yeah.
Trying to make our decisions on the basis of things on this scale may not be a very good idea for us.
That's good. I think that I see where you're coming from. And I think that there is a kind of danger there. And I don't think we have a good answer to it yet. And the kind of danger is what you could call a kind of fanaticism or extremism problem. If you say that, well, because we have some kind of non-trivial chance of having 1 billion years more of humanity if we survive, that this thing becomes so important that everything boils down to how does it affect the long-term future. This has been called, roughly speaking, has been called a kind of strong long-termism perspective that at least in certain domains of our life, ethics boils down to the question of how does it affect the long-term future, perhaps mainly by existential risk. That's not a claim I'm trying to make. And it's not a claim I really want to make. And I also I feel uneasy if someone's like, hey, you could kind of run an argument like that, that, no matter, any kind of tiny chance when you're trying to decide whether to have red wine or white wine for your drinks reception, you should choose that based on the effects it has on, existential risk, because that looms so large. That also feels kind of problematic and a bit crazy to me. And so I do think that there's a question of how does one avoid getting into that situation? I actually think that there are some potential answers to do with moral uncertainty and other things. But I share your concern on that if one tries to just kind of pump these numbers by quite how long we could survive. But I think that there's just an intuitive answer. Even if you capped the effect of the future at like 5 centuries, I think it would still turn out that existential risk is extremely important and important to delineate from other catastrophic risks. But the concern you might have is but you can't cap it at 5 centuries, and then you might be led to extremism. And I think that is a challenge to try to address.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. Let's thank our speaker. Toby, thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks to everyone else that has joined today. And we'll keep you posted on our future activities.
Well, thank you. Good luck with the new center.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
All
Okay,
right.
very good. Thank you.
Thanks a
Congratulations
lot.
one more time.
Thanks a lot.
Congratulations, guys. Okay, good.